Tonight on Nova, this is Marit Brandsma. She's 14 years old, a normal teenager except for one problem. Marit has a rare disease. In another time and place, her diagnosis would have meant deformity, fear, and certain exile. But for Marit, things are different.
Well, it doesn't bug me at all. I'm pretty used to it. I found out when I started getting a tan from lying in the sun, and it was pretty noticeable.
Thanks to discoveries at the Louisiana hospital where her father works, Marit can expect a complete recovery. Finally, leprosy can be cured.
Major funding for NOLA is provided by this station and other public television stations nationwide. Additional funding was provided by the Johnson & Johnson family of companies, supplying healthcare products worldwide. And by Allied Signal, a technology leader in aerospace, electronics, automotive products, and engineered materials.
The Mississippi River. This ferry serves the isolated village of Carville, Louisiana. Here is the only United States hospital specializing in leprosy. Elton Truesdale was born nearby. Now he is one of the hospital's permanent patients.
I'd say that the traumatic effect on the victim of the word leper, with all of its horrible connotations, is psychologically devastating. I know because I lived with it for a lifetime.
Vin Brandsma is a physical therapist at the Carville Hospital. 3 months ago, his 14-year-old daughter Marit noticed a white patch on her right knee. Her father recognized the lighter skin as the first sign of leprosy.
Well, it doesn't bug me at all. I'm pretty used to it. I found out when I started getting a tan from lying in the sun, and it was pretty noticeable then. I asked my dad what it was, and he checked it, and they tested me for leprosy.
It's a very, very early sign of the disease, and we couldn't possibly have diagnosed it any earlier than at this stage.
My parents have worked with leprosy all their lives, so I'm quite used to it. I've been among leprosy patients my whole life, so it's really no big deal for me.
Now, within maybe 1 year or maybe even 2 years, she's cured.
Leprosy is not only completely curable, it's far less infectious than the common cold. So why are there still up to 15 million people worldwide with the disease? And why are some of Carville's patients still severely handicapped?
You had some stuff. I made one. Oh, shit.
Billy Burton is completely cured. It's one of leprosy's many paradoxes that his missing fingers are no sign of contagion or even the presence of disease. But these deformities cause fear, and it's fear and ignorance which continue to hinder the eradication of leprosy.
Praise the Lord. Praise the Lord. I got something. What do you know?
India has more victims than any other country, about 4 million. This village is in Tamil Nadu, the state with the greatest number of leprosy patients. A small white patch is often the first sign of leprosy bacteria in the skin. Patients from all around come to the small village of Karagiri, where Christian missionaries run a leprosy research center. Every Easter, patients and staff gather for a special outdoor service.
Jesus poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet.
The director of the hospital is the Reverend Ernest Ritchie. The hospital at Karagiri is now a major training center for leprosy, and Ernest Ritchie is also the hospital's chief surgeon.
Gopal,
Physicians come from all over the world to learn about the disease. Gopal Balakrishnan has come to Karagiri as an outpatient because he suspects a peculiar pain in his arm may have something to do with leprosy.
He's saying that he has a feeling like ants crawling under his skin. In the shirt, that's typical of neuritis. All right, Tirimbika. Here is a very typical lesion. The color contrast is not
The
very
patches on
great,
Gopal's skin are not harmful. The real danger begins when the bacteria enter the surrounding nerves.
Let's see whether any of the other nerves here are involved. Look at that. Look at that magnificent nerve. Absolutely enormous.
This nerve has become very enlarged as a reaction to the presence of leprosy bacteria.
The Chitvainka, Rattaparchapanika. There is no doubt about it that Gopal has leprosy, but there is no point in telling him that because it would give him a terrific shock. So we use the euphemism mycobacterial neurodermatosis. That means a nerve involvement affecting also the skin caused by the mycobacteria. A very accurate scientific description. And the important thing is the element of nerve involvement in this condition.
These tiny red stains are Mycobacterium leprae, the bacteria which causes leprosy. Here, red bacteria are invading faint blue strips of nerve tissue. Gopal is admitted for further investigation. The bacteria in his nerves are well established, so the nerves can no longer transmit sensory messages to his brain.
The destruction of the nerve is the most serious development in the disease of leprosy. Look at this chap. Injury, injury, injury. A new injury, a crack. And all these are due probably to loss of sensory nerves.
Dr. Fritchie uses a pin to test if any sensation remains in the hands.
Vali onnu illa. Vali illa. Indha kai kuda appadi dhaan irukudha. Adhe madri vali illa. Both hands have lost sensation completely, and that has resulted in this. Idu eppadi vandiruchu?
Gopal's badly cut hands are the result of harvesting sugarcane. Because these injuries don't hurt him, he continued working even when dirt heavily infected the wounds.
Now you and I would have felt pain preceding that. But because of loss of pain, he has got these injuries, and now he's not going to care for them again because he's lost his pain. It's not Mycobacterium leprae that's doing this, it's the destruction of the nerves. Let's see his foot in the Calcutta.
He's also lost pain sensation in his foot.
Distorted foot pattern. There is an ulcer which you can see from this discharge there, and another one which has already cost him his big toe. The problem in leprosy is that in a subsistence economy, you have to work if you want to eat. 1 day's rest in bed means 1 day no food. And that is the tragedy of leprosy. It is not leprae that causes this, but loss of sensation.
In India, many leprosy patients are manual laborers. Their occupations, coupled with a lack of footwear, make them prone to injury. The injuries get a secondary infection, and this leads to tissue destruction and the eventual loss of fingers and toes. At Carville Hospital in Louisiana, Dr. Paul Brand.
We don't just realize, most of us, how much constantly we're depending on pain. It isn't our intelligent thought, I will not damage myself. It is the fact that we get quick feedback, unpleasant feedback, that tells us that we mustn't go ahead because it's hurting. So there's that factor. But even more important than that is the fact that a person's sense of who he is and what parts belong to him is conditioned by pain. And once a person has lost sensation in his hands or feet, even his eyes, he no longer feels that it's part of him. It feels as if he's perhaps got an instrument at the end of his arm. And instruments are expendable.
Max Gonzalez is a patient at Carville.
I believe the pain is very important, very important. Because without pain, you have the tendency to forget that you have hands. You have to constantly remind yourself about that, the fact that you don't have sensation, in order to protect yourself, protect your hands. For example, the cigarette, I have to be aware of them smoking and to throw it in time, before you get burned, something like that.
And so it is that loss of body image, it's the loss of the sense of the importance of who you are and what you are that occurs in this disease that makes it almost easy and natural for a person to do destructive things. I think sometimes they almost dislike themselves. Once a hand has become deformed, it's something that they'd rather, subconsciously, almost rather be rid of.
Leprosy bacteria also destroys the nerves which control muscles in fingers and eyes.
We've got a contact lens on there now and a stitch in your lid to help protect that cornea.
When eye muscles are paralyzed, eyelids cannot be closed. Without protection, eyes are easily injured, and blindness is the ultimate handicap for leprosy patients.
Well, part of your problem is that you haven't
Paul Brand's wife,
had enough
Margaret.
to be able to help you take care of it. That's looking very good. Well, if you think of the normal blind, in the ordinary way, when somebody goes blind, they begin to use their fingers, they become super sensitive, and they can replace much of the information that they would get from their eyes by their fingertips and their ears. But our patients, if they're going to go blind also, don't have that option, and their life becomes meaningless. They feel totally cut off. They have no way to earn a living. Their rehabilitation is almost impossible. They feel really desperate.
Leprosy patients who become blind can be taught to use sound to replace loss of sight and sensation. One area where sensation remains intact is inside the mouth. This tells him which end of the spoon to use. Handicaps caused by muscle paralysis can sometimes be repaired surgically if caught early enough. Many of the procedures were pioneered by Dr. Paul Brand.
When the ulnar nerve is destroyed, a normal hand like this becomes a claw hand. The patient can't fully open the fingers. And that means that whereas a normal hand can grasp a tumbler like this and use the whole surface of the hand, which you can see is just faintly blanched as I grip it firmly, with a claw hand, you use only the fingertips. And that results in an absolutely dead white fingertip, which is blanched by the pressure. And if I kept on holding like this, supposing this was the handle of a hammer, and I was working with it, I might destroy my fingertips completely. Now, Mrs. Smith here has her ulnar nerves paralyzed in both arms. And here you have the preoperative hand with a typical claw deformity. Just open and shut your hand. There we go. And if she tries to hold something, grab that, she can't get her fingers around it. That's really the problem. And this hand was just the same. But just 4 weeks ago, she had an operation. And, okay. Here she is just out of the plaster cast. And you see, her hands already are assuming a natural posture. What we did was to find a good muscle up here in the forearm, and we cut the tendon like a piece of string, cut it here, pulled the tendon out through this incision, and then we tunneled it right around under the skin to the front of the forearm, to this little incision here, where we extended it with a free graft from her leg, and we took it through the palm of her hand with a separate branch to each one of her fingers. And now when she contracts this muscle, these fingers bend like that. That's right. Now she can probably get hold of this one. Can you do that? There you go. Good. And now the beauty of it is that she isn't going to need to worry so much about her fingertip damage because the whole of her hand will share the pressure of her grasp.
The word leprosy is found in the Bible. Translators chose leprosy as a general term to describe any person or object that was morally or physically unclean. Most authorities agree that the condition referred to as leprosy in the Bible has absolutely nothing to do with the disease as it is known today, and in the United States, leprosy is now officially called Hansen's disease, after the Norwegian scientist who discovered the bacterium in 1873. Leprosy treatment has only recently become a medical concern. For hundreds of years, leprosy was a religious matter. In the Middle Ages, the priest made the diagnosis, and permanent segregation was the only treatment he could prescribe. There was no cure. Just over a century ago, the Church took the initiative again. It was the first organization to provide any help for sufferers abroad. Cardinal Léger of Montreal.
If I tell to a congregation the word leprosy, leper, nobody understands. But I understand, because I live with the leper. Leprosy is a question of experience. You can read 100 books on leprosy. If you never saw him, if you never lived with them, in their reserve, in their camps, they were like in a prison, but that prison was a living cemetery. They knew that they were entering there and that they would never go back into society. So that's why the first missionaries, they understood, you see, that the only hope that could be given to them was the hope of eternal life.
Even when Elton Truesdale first arrived at Carville, Louisiana in 1914, leprosy patients were treated more like criminals than innocent victims of an untreatable disease.
Well, when I came in 1914, the place was more like a concentration camp than a hospital. We were not allowed to go out at all, even when my mother died. I was not able to go to her funeral. Strict isolation. Once she got in here, that was the end.
Two patients who did manage to escape were Harry Martin and his girlfriend, Betty.
Well, it was 1933, and Betty and I were both in perfect condition, and so we decided to leave, but the only way we could leave would be through the hole in the fence. So we had our fathers came up, her father came, and my father came at night, blinked the lights, we went out through the hole when we got in the car and headed for New Orleans.
50 years later, they still don't wish to be recognized. They returned to Carville when Harry's condition deteriorated. 6 years had elapsed, but they were punished for leaving without permission.
Well, in those days, when you came back, they'd put you in jail, and Betty went to the detention house and I went to jail for 30 days.
Later, conditions in Carville improved so much that Elton Truesdale decided to return there for his retirement, much to the surprise of one of his tenants.
I remember one of my tenants, we were very close. I wasn't in love with her, but we were very close friends, a lady, and we were together almost all the time because she was one of my tenants, be in my apartment, have coffee with me, and eat with me, and drink with me. And when I retired, she said, well, where are you going? I said, I'm going to Carville. And she looked astonished. She says, Carville? I said, yes, that's right. She said, is that why they have leprosy? I said, yeah, that's right. I said, do you have leprosy? I said, yep, that's right. She looked at me so astonished. And she said, well, she says, I guess it's too late to be afraid now. I said, I guess it is.
Not far from Carville is Elton Truesdale's home. The Truesdale family lived in one of those isolated pockets of leprosy that exist in Louisiana, and which contribute to the 40 or so native-born American cases which turn up each year. Leprosy still occurs naturally in the southern United States and Hawaii. No one really understands why, but poor living conditions and genetic factors are theories. In these parts of the world, there is little chance of catching leprosy. Here, leprosy is widespread. Everyone is at risk. In between, there are pockets of the disease, and the numbers are small. But leprosy was not always a disease of tropical Africa, Asia, South America, and the Western Pacific. As recently as the mid-19th century, over 7% of the population of Bergen in Norway had leprosy. Today, no one. Most of Carville's 300 patients and the 6,000 others living in the United States are recent immigrants or refugees who contracted the disease outside the country. If they need to be admitted to this hospital run by the Public Health Service, there are compensations. Treatment is free, and the hospital has excellent facilities. With early diagnosis, leprosy is curable, with no fear of deformities. Last year, 400 cases were diagnosed in the U.S. Unfortunately, it usually takes 4 years before patients are correctly diagnosed and referred to Carville. This is because of ignorance and fear among doctors. Dr. Paul Brand.
The greatest number of physicians presented with a case of leprosy will not recognize it as such. It doesn't have a proper place in the medical curriculum. Even in a country like India, where the disease is one of the commonest in the country, the medical schools don't give enough time to teaching it. And I think that doctors really themselves are not too keen to change this. They'd rather not have leprosy patients amongst their clientele.
In the area of South India where Gopal lives, probably everyone has been exposed to leprosy bacteria. But in Gopal's family, he was the only one to actually get the disease. A very small percentage of the population, less than 1 in 50, contracts leprosy. It is the least contagious of the infectious diseases. In fact, most people are naturally immune to the infection and quickly kill off the bacteria before they do any harm. Only very rarely do people working with leprosy catch the disease. But in those who do develop leprosy, there must be something wrong with their defense against the bacteria. In Gopal's case, his immune system takes a while to get going. Here's how it happens. Frontline defense cells, called macrophages, engulf the leprosy bacteria. Parts of the bacteria appear on the surface of the macrophage, where they are recognized by white blood cells called T cells. Once the T cell locks on, it instructs the macrophage to completely digest the bacteria. It also recruits reinforcements. For most people, this initial assault is enough. But if it fails, bacteria enter the nerves. And when the immune response takes place, the destructive chemicals that digest bacteria destroy the nerve fibers as well. The inflammation and swelling that results from this battle causes further damage to the fibers as pressure builds up inside the protective sheath of the nerve. One method of reducing the pressure inside Gopal's nerve is surgery. Dr. Fritchie.
Now here I am slitting the sheath.
Paradoxically, Gopal's nerve damage occurs just when he is improving.
And I have just cut through
His
there.
immune system is working more actively than necessary and begins to attack healthy tissue. There are two main types of leprosy. Like Gopal, most victims, over 80%, have tuberculoid leprosy. It's non-infectious because his immune system, though defective, does keep down the number of bacteria in his body. But his neighbor, Chandran Kanayan, has infectious or lepromatous leprosy. With little or no immunity, his body is full of bacteria, which he is constantly discharging from his nose. Ironically, he feels perfectly fit. In advanced cases of lepromatous leprosy, the huge number of bacteria stretch the skin into nodules. The same thing happens in the nerves, which are eventually destroyed. It's assumed that people inhale bacteria directly from infectious cases like Chandran, although infection through cuts in the skin or by insects can't be ruled out. No one really knows. But there is no doubt that there are millions of bacteria multiplying in the nodules in his ear. The bacteria from Chandran's ear are identical to Gopal's. So the reason Chandran has so many more in his body must be due to a more serious defect in his immune system. Although his defense cells, the macrophages, engulf the bacteria, the T cells do not recognize them as harmful and order their destruction. In fact, the inside of the macrophage provides a protective environment which allows the bacteria to multiply unhindered. Eventually, the cell ruptures, spreading bacteria around the body. Chandran and Gopal would be cured if they had been diagnosed early, because in 1950, a scientist at Carville discovered a drug called Promin, which for the first time dramatically cured leprosy. Promin had been used to treat tuberculosis in guinea pigs, and Carville's director, Dr. Guy Faget, decided to see if it would also work on the somewhat similar leprosy bacteria. Soon afterwards, a much cheaper version of Promin called Dapsone became widely available, and both Gopal and Chandran are now being treated with this antibacterial drug. The discovery of a dramatic cure produced a wave of optimism that leprosy could be wiped out in a decade or two. Armed with mountains of Dapsone, the government of India launched a massive national leprosy control program in 1955. Mobile clinics brought treatment to the villages. But over 30 years later, there are still 4 million patients in India, and about 300,000 new cases are detected each year. One of the most serious problems facing India's eradication program is the increasing evidence that more and more patients are not responding to treatment with Dapsone. Dapsone kills bacteria very slowly, and treatment in many cases must continue for life. Rathanam Vanji Samuel has been on Dapsone treatment for 20 years, but there are signs that his condition is deteriorating. In order to check if this problem is being caused by resistance to Dapsone, bacteria are collected from a patch on his back. They will be sent to Karagiri Hospital Laboratory for further investigation. But it will be 6 months before these test results are available. Other possible reasons for failure are checked by paramedical workers making a surprise visit to Rathanam's home to see if he is taking his Dapsone tablets regularly. If he doesn't take his pills every day, the bacteria will learn to live with Dapsone more quickly. The lifelong treatment and slow disappearance of symptoms often discourage patients from taking their pills. Less than 50% of patients take their Dapsone regularly.
He is going to get the tablets. and we will check whether he is taking correctly. 2 weeks ago, he got medicine. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Correct. See, according to the tablets, he is correct. But there is another way of testing.
These tablet counts don't always provide conclusive evidence, as patients sometimes disguise the fact that they have not been taking their medicine.
This is actually to see whether he has really taken the tablet or not. The tablet count gives an information that he has taken, but how to prove? This is a scientific proof to see whether he has swallowed the tablet.
The scientific proof requires a sample of Rathanam's urine. Drops of urine are placed on specially prepared paper.
You can see the outer color yellow, that is urea. Inside, if he has taken a Dapsone tablets, this should have been orange. There is no orange. Is there any orange here? That shows he has not taken the tablets. நீங்க மருந்து சாப்பிடல. நீங்க மருந்து சாப்பிட்டிருந்தா எங்களுக்கு இது கரெக்ட்டா தெரியும். நீங்க ஒழுங்கா மருந்து சாப்பிடணும்.
6 months ago, these mice were injected with Rathanam's leprosy bacteria, and Dapsone was mixed into their daily diet. Today, the bacteria will be collected from these mice. Under a microscope, there are many more bacteria than originally injected. This confirms that they have adapted and are no longer being killed by Dapsone. To combat this problem of Dapsone resistance, 2 additional drugs are now given to patients. The World Health Organization recommends multiple drug therapy because it is extremely unlikely that the bacteria will grow resistant to all 3 drugs simultaneously. The new drugs, the antibiotic rifampicin and clofazimine, also kill the bacteria more quickly. So, treatment can sometimes be reduced to only 6 months. But treating patients successfully requires more than just dishing out powerful drugs. Dr. Paul Brand.
I'm excited about the new drugs. I think that it's very important to prevent drug resistance. But I think that a lot of people are being too optimistic about it. First of all, let's remember that for all these years, 40 years, we've had an effective drug. And still we haven't significantly reduced the world load of leprosy. And the reason for that, I think, is not so much in the inadequacy of the drug, it's in the approach of all the agencies that have been controlling the mass treatment campaigns. And I believe the key point is that they haven't looked at it from the point of view of the patient. See, as far as physicians and statisticians and epidemiologists are concerned, leprosy is how many bacilli there are in the body. And if you can do a bacterial count and see that it's being reduced, they say this is success. The patient doesn't look at that at all. He doesn't even know about it. He looks at his deformities, at the hands and feet and the facial deformities that result in the stigma and his ostracism. And when the doctor says they're getting better and they see that their deformities are getting worse, they just don't cooperate. They don't feel that the doctor knows his job. And we have simply got to improve that relationship, that confidence between the patient and the doctor before we're going to get success. The patient has got to realize that he is indeed getting better, and above all, perhaps, we've got to help him to prevent the deformities.
One possible solution to the shortcomings of the present method of controlling leprosy would be to develop a vaccine. Such a vaccine should protect individuals against infectious cases, which are believed to be the only reservoir of bacteria. It could be given in the same way as polio vaccine, as a matter of course. In general, successful vaccines consist of a small number of killed or weakened organisms which trigger the immune system to recognize and repel any subsequent infection. In India and elsewhere, scientists are attempting to create a vaccine for leprosy. But progress has been slow. Although the leprosy bacterium was identified over a century ago, no one has been able to grow it successfully in a test tube. The only source of bacteria was in the nodules of infectious patients, and they clearly could not provide enough bacteria for any large-scale tests. But a way of producing greater quantities of bacteria came from an unexpected quarter. Researchers at Carville discovered that the local 9-banded armadillo could be infected with human leprosy bacteria. In 3 years, the multiplied bacteria from this anesthetized armadillo will be collected and then killed with heat. Vaccine derived from armadillos is very expensive to process, about $50 a shot. Also, armadillos don't breed in captivity, and the number that can be trapped is limited. These factors inhibit the future mass production of a vaccine containing dead leprosy bacteria. Dr. Paul Brand.
I think that work on a vaccine has got to move ahead in high gear. We've got to put all the resources we can into it. It's very, very important. But I'm almost equally insistent that actual leprosy workers and physicians in the field combating leprosy at this present time forget about it. I think there's a real danger that this idea of a vaccine just around the corner is making people back off the need to develop new drugs, new direct therapeutic measures. Because I think that it's going to be a long time before the vaccine is available.
And there is also a question about how effective a vaccine containing dead organisms would be. So at MIT's Whitehead Institute, genetic engineers are attacking the vaccine problem at the molecular level. Dr. Richard Young.
Our objective is to identify the key molecules that are involved in stimulating the appropriate immune response and use those as the basis for a molecular vaccine.
For the appropriate immune response to occur, macrophage cells must first ingest bacteria. The bacteria are broken into bits, and a few molecules appear on the surface. Scientists call them key antigens. Although key antigens can be recognized by immune system weapons called antibodies, they're ineffective. In leprosy, it is the white blood cells called T cells that are responsible for instructing macrophages to kill the bacteria. They also recruit other T cells to join in the defense. But out of the thousands of submicroscopic molecules that make up a leprosy bacterium, how is it possible for researchers to identify just those key antigen molecules which actually trigger defense cells into eliminating the bacteria from the body? New genetic engineering techniques are enabling Dr. Young and his colleagues to tackle this problem. The first task was to break the bacteria's DNA into 4 million bits. Contained in these fragments are all the genes that code for different parts of the leprosy bacteria, including the genes which make the key antigens. But single genes are too small to be seen. So viruses are used to carry the genes one at a time into laboratory bacteria, which can be tricked into accepting the leprosy genes as their own. Then, as the bacteria divide, they copy not only their own genes, but the extra leprosy gene as well. Thousands of colonies are grown in the laboratory, each containing about 20,000 virus-infected bacteria. Eventually, the bacteria burst, releasing thousands of molecules, including those programmed by the leprosy genes. But where on this plate are the critical key antigen molecules?
The problem we face is finding the gene that produces the key antigen that stimulates the immune response. The antigen molecules are sticky, and we can attach them to a piece of filter paper that we overlay on the plate. Although we can't see the antigens, we can look for them with an antibody that we already know attaches to a key leprosy antigen. If the antibody that we've poured on does find this antigen on the filter, it will bind to it, and with a simple laboratory trick, it will change color. The spot that changes color reflects a spot on the plate where a leprosy gene is producing the key antigen that stimulates the immune response. This is the original filter that was terribly exciting to see, and although you can't see it, there is a spot here which represents the first key antigen from leprosy that we isolated. What is even more exciting is that the white blood cells recognize this antigen, and it is those cells that are ultimately important for eliminating leprosy.
Leprosy's long incubation period means that this baby will be a teenager before human trials can prove that this new approach is going to work. But if it does, children around the world will benefit from a low-cost molecular vaccine in which key antigens are the main ingredient.
The way that we're currently attacking leprosy is largely with drugs. And the history of that attack has been the appearance of drug resistance. And I think it's a fair assumption that the future of that kind of attack will be increased drug resistance. And I think what we'd really like to focus on is eradication. And if we could develop a vaccine that worked, then it's possible, some of us believe, to eradicate leprosy in perhaps a generation.
Today, only 1 out of 5 leprosy cases worldwide actually receives treatment. A cheap one-shot vaccine given in infancy would be the most effective method of controlling the disease. But in a city like Bombay, even a vaccine may not be enough to eradicate leprosy. Every day, hundreds of rural families flock here in the hope of finding a better life. Already, about half of Bombay's 9 million inhabitants live in extremely overcrowded slums. More slums are spreading around the city all the time. Similar conditions existed in Europe when leprosy was widespread there. There was no cure then, yet the disease eventually disappeared. Improved hygiene, housing, and nutrition were probably the key factors. Leprosy is now well established in Bombay's slums. It is a serious urban problem. In the northern suburbs, the Bombay Leprosy Project is responsible for leprosy control. Early on, they realized that the mass media was not being used to reach victims. For example, this 10-year-old film is one of only a couple available for public education, despite the fact that movies are India's favorite pastime.
A tiny skin patch. He had never noticed it before. Maybe rash or something. The lady doesn't think much of it, but he does not want to take chances. So when the doctor expresses her doubt that the patch might be a symptom of leprosy, it shocks the couple. How can it be? Is not leprosy hereditary? No. Does it not run in the family for generations? No.
Probably no disease has more misconceptions surrounding its cause than leprosy.
Leprosy? No, absolutely not. No, I have absolutely no idea.
Could it be through the water?
I feel that it is hereditary.
My accountant had an experience that he had an intercourse with a woman and he was affected with the leprosy by the private parts of her body.
It's caused by the environment around and the bad food.
In Pakistan, they do a lot of it. But what is it called? We don't know.
Do you have any idea what causes it?
Just bad luck, I think. It's a disease of the nose, isn't it?
Leprosy, bacilli or something. It's a scientific term. It comes through that because it is a contagious disease.
It is a bacillus.
Mycobacterium leprae.
The Bombay Leprosy Project moved into mass media education in collaboration with Indian Railways. Posters were placed in all compartments, so they were seen by hundreds of thousands of commuters. A special screening booth was set up on the station platform. They discovered that people who came forward voluntarily for treatment seemed more motivated to take pills than those detected in house-to-house surveys. But this campaign was an isolated event. After a week, the booth was dismantled, and the posters on the trains and buses were eventually removed for lack of money. Traditionally, money is only spent on treatment and detection surveys, not on public education. Not surprisingly, these surveys show that there is much more leprosy in the slums than in the expensive high-rise neighborhoods. Within the slum population, the single biggest source of infectious lepromatous leprosy is men. So Bombay Leprosy Project decided to concentrate its detection efforts on this group. Factory surveys are an efficient way of reaching these infectious male cases. These checkups are euphemistically described as skin camps. 2 infectious cases were discovered here. To protect their jobs, their identities are kept confidential. Leprosy can take 7 years to incubate. The disease is frequently diagnosed at a stage when infectious cases, like this man, have already been discharging bacteria for months or even years. There is no practical test for leprosy before the symptoms appear. 2 days later, paramedics visit the homes of the 2 factory workers to check if any of their family or close contacts have leprosy. One son is a suspected early case. The family is told that if father and son take their drugs regularly, the disease will soon become non-infectious, and both could be treated as outpatients at the local hospital. Leprosy in India has traditionally been treated in special hospitals. Bombay's Sir J.J. Hospital is one of a very few general hospitals willing to admit leprosy patients. Outpatients and those needing surgery are freely admitted to the hospital and its plastic surgery wards. But fear still often causes opposition to such integration. A week ago, all these beds were occupied by leprosy patients. Then, objections from staff and patients forced the dermatology department to empty this ward, except for this man, who has been relegated to a small leprosy-only room. Patients at Sir J.J. Hospital face less stigma than if referred to an old-style leprosarium, like Mr. Ackworth's hospital in central Bombay. Ackworth was established in 1894 as a result of the Lepers Act. This act authorized the permanent incarceration of lepers found on the street, and it actually remained on the statute book until 1984. Before the discovery of a cure for leprosy, strict segregation was the only method of dealing with patients. Most of Ackworth's 380 inmates are now completely dependent on the institution. Although cured, many do not wish to be discharged. Those that do leave frequently get no further than a life of begging just outside the hospital gate. Others leave Ackworth to live in one of the leprosy colonies that have sprung up in the northern suburbs of Bombay. This leprosy colony is a self-contained community with its own elected leader. It is an extremely clean and well-organized village. Ex-patients can lead a life that is close to normal. But like a number of colonies, it maintains itself by bootlegging the illicit alcohol it distills. Drinking the liquor can be hazardous, yet production has not so far been disrupted by raids from the police, possibly because the still is right in the center of the colony. Back in Ackworth, the majority of the long-term patients will never return to their family and community, or have a job. Ackworth's research officer is Dr. S.S. Pandya.
The Ackworth Hospital represents the old style of thinking about leprosy. They thought that the leprosy patients should be locked up and segregated. So that's the sort of atmosphere that was existing in this hospital till very, very recently, where you see a lot of disabled people who have been disowned by their families and who are totally dependent on public support for their livelihood. So that's not really rehabilitation. It's more like dehabilitation.
In an attempt to stop further dehabilitation, a sheltered workshop has been set up in the hospital for a handful of the more motivated patients. Rehabilitation is most successful when patients can avoid long-term admission to institutions like Ackworth. Social worker Naushad Soparawala encourages patients to return to their old jobs in the community as soon as possible. 3 years ago, Bolanath Jalal suspected he had leprosy from seeing a film about it. He came forward and was told he could be treated at home. Bolanath was put on multiple drug therapy and is now cured. His social worker was also concerned about his financial health, as he was unemployed at the time of diagnosis. With her support, Bolanath got a substantial bank loan to buy a three-wheeler taxi. But he is a rare success. Leprosy is as much a social as it is a medical problem. Dr. S.S. Pandya.
Well, let's face it, no amount of drug taking or vaccine giving is going to eradicate an infectious disease like leprosy. The reason is that we tend to look for medical solutions to what are basically social problems. And all these chronic diseases, including tuberculosis, leprosy, VD, and so on, they're not really amenable to purely medical attack. So I don't think multi-drug therapy and the new drugs are going to eradicate leprosy, but they're certainly going to change what I like to call the face of leprosy, because we are certainly going to be seeing more patients in the early stages of the disease, and hopefully they're not going to get all the nerve damage and the disability and the deformity that was formerly associated with leprosy. The sort of leprosy that we see will not be as severe as was seen, say, 50 years ago.
If Gopal, Chandran, and Rathanam take their drugs and protect themselves against deformity, they should not meet with a stigma that usually confronts victims. And if the stigma disappears, the the face of leprosy will have truly been changed. The fear of leprosy was born out of ignorance. With education, effective control of the disease is now feasible. Every victim can afford to be as unconcerned as Myrit Brandsma. She's always known that with treatment, her disease poses no danger to herself or anyone else.
No, not at all. Even when I had it, it didn't bother me. I just had another thing, you know. Really doesn't bother me.
For a transcript of this program, send $4 to Nova, Box 322, Boston, Massachusetts, 02134. Please be sure to include the show title. To purchase film or video copies of this program for educational use, call toll-free 1-800-621-2131. In Illinois or Alaska, call Collect, 312-940-1260. Major funding for NOVA is provided by this station and other public television stations nationwide. And by Allied Signal, a technology leader in aerospace, electronics, automotive products, and engineered materials. And the Johnson & Johnson family of companies, supplying health care products worldwide.